Was Gilly Flaxman with Hallowed Ground. You're on 94.9. It is 4:15, and it's that time of day for Creation Ministries International. And this afternoon we have a very special guest, Dr. Ron Neller. And if you've got any questions for Dr. Ron during the afternoon, please text them through to us. Our text line is 0401 949 949. Now, I probably should have introduced Dr. Ron as Batman. Good afternoon, Batman.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Why am I Batman?
Well, I was reading this page on the internet, and it said dynamic creation duo from down under on tour in Ireland and the UK. And I thought, wow, check that out. 21st of May till 8th of June. Everyone can go and see Dr. Ron and Mrs. Julie Neller, the dynamic creation duo, which is a bit like the, dynamic duo. So I assumed, like Batman, Batwoman, you're going to Ireland and the UK.
Yes, we are, and it's going to be an absolute delight to be speaking across Ireland and the UK. Prior to that, though, just to let you know, we are speaking in Malaysia, in Penang, Sarawak, and in Singapore as well for 3 weeks. So we're on the move, mate. We're on the move.
Wow, all over the world. And, of course, Dr. Ron Neller, for everybody who may not have heard of Dr. Ron before, he's been on the program numerous times. He is a fluvial geomorphologist, which is basically someone who looks at rivers and how they shape things. Is that a really simple explanation?
That's a good explanation, yes. It's why the landscape today looks the way it does. And we make the mistake of thinking that current day rainfall and current day rivers created it, but it didn't.
Yes. Now, of course, Dr. Ron, being an awesome fluvial geomorphologist that's going all over the world to speak to everybody with his beautiful wife, he came to Christ a little later in life. Now, you've told us a little bit about your journey, Dr. Ron. Can you sort of explain to us how it happened?
Yes, I did come quite late, and that's why I want to have a chat to Paul when I get there as to who was more difficult, whether he was more difficult or I was more difficult. But it wasn't until I was in my 50s that I gave my life to Christ, and it came actually through Julie, who was not my wife at that stage. Mm-hmm. She was working in the university where I was working, and she thought, because I believed there must be a God when I was not a Christian, but believing there was a God, she challenged me. And that challenge went on for months and months until one day she decided to take me to a church. I'm going to prove that God doesn't exist. So here we have this unusual day with an atheist lady, who's a biologist, by the way,
yep,
drags an agnostic fluvial geomorphologist into church. And we had lots of arguments in that church, even just going into the church, being academics. But on that day, the message absolutely hit us. Now, don't ask us what that message was. We have no idea anymore. But the point was, it hit us both that on that day we both gave our lives to Christ. And then we realized then that we didn't actually have an antagonism to each other. We actually had a love. And out of that, year and a half later, we were married.
Wow.
And it's just gone on from there, where we both ended up leaving university for different reasons. It's not the place to express openly your faith. Yep. And so I ended up joining, ultimately, Creation Ministries. And Julie has since also become a speaker. She will be speaking on 10 occasions in Malaysia and Singapore.
Oh, wow.
And so she's rising the ranks as well. And so we're both taking off around the world now, proclaiming our love of Christ. And proclaiming, more importantly, how it was the book of Genesis, actually, that brought us to Christ. Because we didn't come to Christ through other people so much.
Mm-hmm.
We were just an agnostic and an atheist, walked into a church one day.
Wow.
But it was actually derived, that argument, it was actually on the book of Genesis, of all things.
So you were arguing about it before you went to church?
We were. Well, actually, we were more in one way it was more subtle. I didn't realise that my fluvial geomorphology, I was actually studying the book of Genesis. I didn't realise it, but I was coming to the belief that there must be a God because the evidence I saw worldwide, because I did work from Libya to Peru to Finland to China, I saw evidence of a global flood.
Yep.
And so I began to be attracted to it, and therefore I was actually studying the book of Genesis.
Yeah, now, can I just add right now, Dr. Runn is a PhD, which is, I always say super smart dude, but PhD means like super, super, super smart dude in fluvial geomorphology.
That's a good term. I always refer to PhD as photocopying doctorate because we have to photocopy so many other authors' papers to understand them and read them. But Julie then, when she was challenging me, went away and read the book of Genesis.
Oh.
Isn't that interesting? Because she thought she'd start reading the Bible, which, by the way, atheists love doing.
Yes.
Atheists everywhere read the Bible because they want to be able to challenge us. And so she read the Bible. She read the
But you weren't a Christian at that time anyway.
No. But she thought she could bring me down by having a look at the Bible. So interesting academic approach to it.
Yes.
We were both looking at the book of Genesis, and no other book, really.
Yep.
I think she got in Exodus a little bit. But we were both coming to grips with the book of Genesis at that time when I was challenged to take her into a church to prove God doesn't exist, and it changed both our lives.
Wow. And, of course, you've been called a flood chaser before, so you know all about flooding. I mean, later on I might even ask a little bit about the Queensland floods, but you know all about floods. And to say that you saw the book of Genesis sort of coming into play in your own life, like you were looking at this world saying, hey, this Genesis thing really looks like it happened, and everything else you had learnt at university prior to becoming a PhD, you must have been scratching your head.
Correct. Yes, you are taught one way of thinking, and you tend to accept it because it is coming from peers. It's coming from the elite within the academic world. But when you get out there and look at the evidence, particularly when you look at the evidence globally, and I was doing this prior to even the Landsat and the satellite imagery. I was looking globally and I was seeing patterns. And those patterns could not be explained by local processes or regional processes.
Yep.
And so I began to think at a global level that something has happened to this planet of a water nature, of a flood. And hence I began to think, well, maybe there is a God because that element of the Bible seems to be true.
Wow. And it led you to just keep looking, I guess, keep trying to discover the truth.
Yes, it took me many, many years. As I said, I want to chat to Paul about this. But anyhow, it was a good journey where I continued to explore. I then began to even look at fossils and so on as well. And they pointed also to a global flood.
Yep.
And I think we talked about that once before, that the fossil formation does not occur today because we simply don't have enough big floods and enough sediment to actually create the fossils. So whatever I was looking at, whether it was fossils as evidence of biological evolution or landscapes, evidence of sort of geologic evolution, if we can use that word, I kept seeing a global flood.
Wow. So what you're saying there is we're not going to find, well, if the Earth was going to last another, so many thousand years, which most of us don't believe it will, but if it did, no one would actually find fossils from today.
That's correct. We are not. Detailed explorations have been done worldwide, including offshore, where we thought we would find fossils. But we are not finding fossils. There may be one or two created by human processes like mining, things like that,
Yep.
But not that natural process of being buried in sediment, put under high pressure, through depth, high temperatures. That's not occurring anywhere on the planet today.
Okay, well let's look at this recent flooding sort of situation that happened in Queensland. Well, I know in Lismore there was a bit of flooding, and even back in, I think it was 2018-ish, they had a bigger flood down there. Those floods, if a cow was washed down the river, there's no way that could become a fossil one day in the future.
No, because the sediment that's travelling down, it looks dirty. That's our perception of it. The media will say it is dirty, but the amount of sediment in that is not sufficient. You have to bury an organism tens or hundreds of metres deep to get the pressure and the temperature and so on. It's not a slow process. It's got to be a rapid process. Otherwise, there's decomposition and decay and predation occurring. And so that cow, in any case, most organisms when they drown will bloat and float. So by the time they settle to the bottom, the sediment's already gone anyway. So it just doesn't happen that way these days.
How much sediment do you get from a flood?
Oh, it varies around the world, but I look at it from a depositional point of view. I look at how deep is the sediment when it's being put into place. So if you look at the oceans, for example, the worst in the world would have 5 centimetres in 1,000 years. And I'll be blunt, I couldn't fossilise a cockroach with 5 centimetres in 1,000 years.
Wow.
It's not rapid enough, it's not deep enough to place the pressure. Essentially, one needs to look at forcing liquids out and all sorts of things. That just doesn't happen. Even when you come onto shore, even into floodplains, we might measure over a floodplain, over a small area, maybe 10 centimetres of sediment being deposited. Now, you will get in some agricultural areas or construction sites a little bit more, but we're talking only a few hundred metres or, at the most. We're not talking about 1.5 million square kilometres of sediment, which we find in the past, riddled with trillions of fossils. We don't see that anywhere on the planet. We see little local things, but even that 10 centimetres is still not enough to stop predation, is still not enough to place weight and compaction on the organism, so you're just not going to get the fossils.
All right. You are on 94.9 this afternoon. It is 27 minutes past 4. We're going to come back to Dr. Ron Neller after our break. Right now, we're going to have a song. This is Kobe James with a song called Pressure. That was Torrin Wells, Love is Action. You're on 94.9. It is 23 minutes to 5. And we have Dr. Ron Neller on the line, a geomorphologist. Yes, he's been known as a flood chaser. He knows all about, he's got a PhD in it, knows all about sort of flooding and what happens in giant floods and small floods. And he was telling us his story in the first half of the hour about how he became a Christian because at a very late age, in his 50s, because he was sort of looking at all this evidence all over the planet and thinking, hey, my university didn't say this, but I'm seeing something a little bit different. Then he started reading the Bible, Genesis, and he thought, wow, this sort of lines up real well. And he and his now current wife, they used to like debating the fact, the Christianity fact, ended up in a church, went to church, and that's history now. And we were just talking about what happens in a flood and what sort of things we see in floods. And one thing that we don't see anymore anyway is fossils being created anymore. That happened way back because there was a big giant flood. But I do have a question, Dr. Ron. What happens in, say, like we've seen over in Asia recently, there's been some giant landslides and mudslides. Could they create fossils?
A good question. Again, you still need incredible depth. Now, a landslide is a mixture of sediment of different sizes. There'll be things from boulders down to cobbles, down to stones, down to soil, clays, everything like that mixed up together. So what happens in that situation, it's not the ideal sediment structure. In fact, the majority of fossils are clearly, I think it's 99% or more, I'm not sure the exact figure, so don't quote me on that, but it's very, very high, of fossils are found in what you would call a flood sediment, because each sediment has its own fingerprint, so to speak. So, I can tell the difference between a wind-blown sediment, a coastal sediment, and a fluvial or flood sediment very easily with some simple analyses. So it's always been the flood sediment that has the right, in a sense, the right porosity, the ability to move water through, the right ability to absorb water. When you see landslides, you're going to see the diversity of the sediment is way too big. You'll actually see crushing going on, all sorts of things going on with the organism. And again, it does come back to, is that a suitable environment for fossils? Because whilst you need a lot of sediment and heavy sediment, you also need other things as well, particularly groundwater movement and a few other things. I always focus on the sediment because that's the thing that's ignored. But you need other things as well, and I don't think you're going to find those so much in a landslide. Now, I know geologic sites will talk about it, but landslides, even some of the biggest, they're impressive over how big an area. They're impressive to us visually, but in terms of explaining the world's distribution of fossils in flood sediments around the world, no matter where you go, this landslide, if it does create the odd fossil or two, has no impact at all on the overall pattern. Not in the slightest, because as I said, 99% are in flood sediments, not landslide sediments.
So I guess volcanoes are out of the question as well.
Well, volcanoes will be a part of the flood because certainly when the global flood occurred, there was a lot of volcanic activity as well. And so that volcanic material is wrapped up in that flood sediment. So you'll find that as well. But again, if it's an individual volcano, that lava is not going to do anything. It's certainly not going to create fossils. No, you need a lot of ash, and I'm talking about an incredible amount of ash.
I guess lava would just burn people up, or whatever it was. It wouldn't have to be a person, animal, whatever. It would burn it up. It would have to only be the ash, wouldn't it?
That's right. Yeah, there's nothing much left after that. Yeah. No, so landslides, I get asked that question often in the church. But when you look at it relative to the importance of the flood, if the flood is 99% of the, I don't even know how many fossils we're talking about. There's trillions and trillions, whatever the next one up, above billions and trillions, I don't know what it is. But that number of fossils is derived essentially from a flood. So I would say the landslide, if it does have an impact, is so small, it's just not worth really considering. It doesn't impact my argument that it's a gigantic flood that was capable of tearing the planet apart, capable of shifting kilometres of sediment, cubic kilometres of sediment, because the sediment that was deposited then would be easily at places 12 kilometres deep, 16 kilometres deep. Wow. Now that will create a fossil. Wow. I don't see that in a landslide though.
What's the biggest flood you've ever seen?
I've seen quite a few, but they're still, a flood is when it goes out of the channel, basically, is what we call a flood, and goes across the floodplain. So there was the Brisbane 74 flood. That was a good one. Then there was the Lismore ones. They're impressive, mainly because of the landscape in which it's in. Yep. And just for the record, I do get invited to Lismore to speak. They love hearing about floods. Yes. And it's a sad town in one respect. That there's, even from 2018, there are many buildings that have still not been rebuilt. Yeah. So that the damage to human property, the damage to human life, the damage to everything is incredible. But no humans become fossils and no organisms become fossils during even the Lismore or the Brisbane 74 flood, or I've seen floods in the Amazon area. No, that they just don't create fossils.
What about the sand? We saw metres of sand off Surfers Paradise Beach there, or whatever the beach is called there. Metres of sand has gone from kilometres of the beach. All of that sand, where does it go? Is that like evenly spread over huge areas, or is there little holes it drops into?
No, it'll spread back out into the deeper waters, and then of course it'll be brought back on shore again over a long period of time through what we would call then a depositional phase, and the dunes will be rebuilt. This goes on. It's gone on throughout history. Our four dunes will be eroded away. The sand moves offshore. But then the onshore processes will bring it back slowly over time. So it's distributed over a fair area out there. But again, it's not deep. You won't find it as sand dunes out there.
Okay, so again, it can't make fossils.
No.
Wow.
I think that's the problem we face, is that you've even got major associations, scientific associations like the United Kingdom Geological Association, saying that most fossils are marine, therefore most sediment is in the marine area. Yet after 50 to 100 years of monitoring this planet, we have found that the least sediment is in the marine area. As I said, 5 centimetres in 1,000 years, that's not going to do anything. And that's in the worst areas, So we still cling to a belief that it's slowly changing to more rapid sedimentation. I see the word rapid used more regularly now, but the depth of sedimentation is not understood. And certainly not. You still get the stories when you go onto any website that it's a slow accumulation of sediment. That's not the case. The fossilization process has to be acted upon very rapidly, actually. Otherwise, you're going to see, as I say, decay, decomposition, all sorts of things will kick in.
Yeah, wow. Wow, that's incredible. I mean, it's certainly not something we ever really consider. You got to think, okay, where does all the sediment come from? And there is only one thing that could have brought all that sediment, and it is a colossal flood, a huge flood, a mega flood, and a flood that literally covered the whole planet. Other than that...
Well, it didn't just cover it, it ripped it apart, mate. It ripped it apart.
Yeah.
And people often ask me, was Mount Everest covered by the floodwaters? And I'll say no. And they said, but we thought the whole Earth was flooded. I said, it was. Mount Everest wasn't there. Mount Everest is a sedimentary rock.
Yep.
It is riddled with fossils, not over the top of it. It's riddled with fossils through the middle of it.
Wow.
So therefore, it was part of the sedimentary deposits on the ocean floor after the global flood tore it apart. And then, of course, the Lord raised the land, or 30% of it is all we got.
Yep.
And these high peaks now, we go, oh, yeah, that must have been a pretty big flood. But that's our misinterpretation. That was land raised after the flood, as one of the Psalms points out.
Well, Dr. Ron, speaking to you, it makes so much sense that there was a great flood. And, of course, there's a good reason that we should believe in what the Bible says is correct, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll be honest, once I became a Christian, and part of that was because I believed in the global flood before I became a Christian. That's interesting. I believed in a global flood before it. Once I became a Christian, I didn't challenge the other parts of the book of Genesis. Yep. Because I thought, if we're so wrong just on something so obvious, where we've got evidence like a global flood, why would I dare challenge other parts? Why would I question them? You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's sort of like where we do have the evidence, it stacks up so strongly of a flood. So I thought, I'm not going to question the other elements like 6 days or miracles. I'm not going to do that, because now I'm really,
wow.
That's just being difficult more than I was.
Wow. Okay. Well, Dr. Ron, we've come to the end of another week, another awesome week. Love speaking with you. Always exciting, particularly the flood stuff. I get so much out of it. And I believe we probably won't speak to you again for a while, because you're going overseas and you've got, you're going to tell me where else you're going. And we might even let people know if you're coming sort of closer to us here in New South Wales. But next time we're speaking will be the 7th month of the year.
Okay, but that'll be quite soon after I get back. And I will be coming down to central New South Wales. I know I'm speaking at various parts in the second half of the year in Port Macquarie, Newcastle, Tamworth, those sorts of towns and cities.
Yep.
So, look, I'll get our team to let you know exactly where I'll be, where I'm speaking. And who knows, you and I might even catch up for a coffee, mate, wouldn't it?
That would be absolutely awesome. Well, thank you again, Dr. Ron from Creation Ministries International, and we'll speak to you again soon. You're on 94.9. It is 11 minutes to 5.